Hello, our group will be talking about mental health, consumers and their effects to poverty. Introducing Rita, Emily, Peter, Kristen and Joe. Our group will be presenting mental health which is linked to poverty. We all mutually came together with the same concerns of interest to further our understanding and knowledge on mental health being clearly associated with poverty. We also feel that this is a human rights issue and believe that changes need to take place in the macro level by promoting change in policy and laws to strengthen and protect the rights of individuals with mental health disabilities. Furthermore, mental health should also be incorporated into mainstream education. It also should include educating children with a mental disability to be supported in their school environment. The misconceptions about mental health leads to assumptions that the symptoms of mental health cannot be treated. Therefore, these people are regarded as invaluable members in our community. Robert Blant stated that the High Commissioner of Human Rights set out 21 principles that shape mental health and policy. And one of these is the fundamental freedoms and the basic rights that all persons with a mental illness shall be treated with humanity and respect for the inherent dignity of the human person. There should be no discrimination to the grounds of mental illness. However, the evidence and the statistics clearly identify the prevalence of mental and psychosocial disability preventing people from participating in the community. And according to the World Health Organization, these people are vulnerable and marginalised who are subjected to stigma and discrimination in their ability to perform on a daily basis. Our findings clearly show that a majority of people are facing disproportionate barriers with finding employment and are homeless. On the other hand, are unemployed because they are unable to secure employment, go on to the Disability Pension Support Scheme. Unemployed people are living on a low income, the stress of poverty, having to provide food for their children and family, paying rent, are all barriers to opportunities that lead to social exclusion and are increasing at an increase of income inequality. Further to our findings, they are unable to access health and social care, to afford treatment and medication, putting themselves at a further risk. Overall, this research will assist us to understand the structural disadvantage of poverty, their mental illness and the nature of deprivation impacting on their chances of having their basic needs met, let alone having any equal opportunities. It is clear that poverty is connected between being mentally ill and being poor, and that poverty is a clear and predictable consequence of major mental illness. Our research will discuss in detail the contributing factors to poverty, which will provide evidence and statistics of mental health and poverty in Australia. I will be passing you on to Emily, who will discuss the quantity data.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be discussing the relevant quantitative data and research on mental health and poverty. An overwhelming majority of people living with mental health and psychosocial disabilities are living in poverty. According to the Australian Government Institute of Health and Welfare, 45.5% or around 7.3 million Australians between the age of 16 and 85 will experience a mental disorder at some point in their lifetime. This puts many people at risk for living in poverty in Australia. In a National Australian Council of Social Service conference, Barbara Hocking, the director of SAME, gave some statistics and brought awareness to some of the issues people living with mental illnesses are dealing with. These include that 46% of people living with mental illness are unable to afford treatment and/or medication. That means that only 54% are able to afford medication. She also stated that 96% of people with mental illnesses are unable to afford the basic essentials to live. This includes housing, food, and the very medication that can help a person with their sufferings. Table 1 right here presents a brief understanding of the incomes people with mental illness receive. As stated, only 31% of people living with mental illness were earning over $50,000 a year. That's in this section right here. This may be because many sufferers of mental illness may end up finding themselves losing or quitting a job due to the inability to cope. Those that are unable to work may find themselves on the disability support pension. provided by the Australian Government. According to the Australian Council of Social Services, or ACOS, 36.2% of those receiving the disability support pension were living in poverty. That's seen in Table 2, which were a total of 284,500 people on the pension living below the 50% median poverty income line. When looking at the disability support pension to analyse why there are so many people living in poverty, it was found that the maximum basic rate per fortnight for a single person over the age of 21 was $970.60, and for a couple it was $684.10 each. As seen in Table 4 here, the payments that these people have received had a gap of $126 per week below the 50% median poverty income line, and a gap of $177 below the 60% median poverty income line. With this in mind, ACOS found that 57.3% of all people below the poverty income line relied on only their social security as their main source of income. From this, it can be articulated that the payments that people received are not enough to support a quality of life while suffering mental illness. With the cost of housing and living going up, the affordability of housing has become a stress for people living with disability. A survey by SANE found that people living with mental illness, 94% of them had been homeless or without suitable housing at some point in their lives. Another study in Melbourne found that 30% of their homeless sample had mental health issues. Also, a major Australian study found that 75% of the sample of homeless people in inner Sydney had reported at least one mental disorder. In 2016, there were only 389 or 0.5% of properties nationally for those who received the disability support pension. This could be a contributing factor as to why people living with mental illnesses are becoming homeless. In a research bulletin by SANE Australia, it was found that 1 in 6 or 17% of people surveyed with mental illness were spending more than $100 a month on medications. For those on a low income, these costs can add up and have a considerable effect on an individual. In the same survey, it was found that 96% of people living with a mental illness on low incomes had to choose between healthcare or meeting their daily needs. This included times where people were unable to afford food. That now sums up the quantitative data on mental health and poverty. I'll now give you to Peter, who will discuss the causes of poverty for mental health consumers.
My name is Peter, and I'm going to be discussing the causes of poverty for mental health consumers. Psychiatric illnesses and poor mental health causes poverty for thousands of Australians, which significantly impacts on an individual's ability to live a full life and influences the extent to which they experience poverty. If we are to consider the individual theory of poverty, individuals are expected to stand on their own 2 feet to lift themselves out of poverty, including those suffering poor mental health. This idea is very difficult for a person with a mental illness to achieve and overcome, as employers associate mental illness with being unreliable and lazy, and have the belief that they simply do not want to work. The individual theory of poverty also suggests that everyone has the same freedoms and opportunities to succeed, which is undoubtedly a flawed argument. Firstly, mental health consumers need extra funds to access support services, such as psychiatry or counselling services. Secondly, mental health consumers do not have the same opportunities and mental capacity as a person who is considered to have good overall mental health and well-being to secure employment. We also need to consider how difficult it is for an individual with a mental illness to foresee the impact that their condition could have on their prospective employment, as every psychiatric disability affects people's ability to function fully in society and maintain employment differently. This unknowing could seem vague and too unpredictable to the employer, and therefore can result in the individual not being able to secure employment if they disclose that they suffer from a mental illness. Consequently, mental health consumers are at a disadvantage when faced with the labour market to help alleviate the risk of poverty. Additionally, the individual theory of poverty suggests that a person will be able to avoid poverty if they find work. However, according to the Poverty in Australia 2016 report, 15.5% of people in part-time employment and 4.7% of people in full-time employment experience poverty regardless of the wages that they receive. Consequently, there is added pressure for those with a mental illness to enter the labour market and secure full-time employment where wage conditions are adequate enough to avoid poverty. We must also keep in mind that securing part-time or casual employment is perhaps more manageable and ideal for an individual with a mental illness before it starts to negatively affect their mental health and well-being. One could suggest that the expectation of securing and maintaining employment could mean that the individual does not see an incentive to entering or re-entering the labour market due to the inequity in opportunities available to support them to succeed in Australian society. Furthermore, the only regular form of financial support available to mental health consumers in terms of welfare benefits is the disability support pension. During the last decade, the government has made it extremely difficult to obtain the DSP, and the strict eligibility criteria has meant that a significant number of psychiatric conditions are excluded from accessing this benefit, which contributes to poverty for mental health consumers. More importantly, you are still at risk of experiencing poverty if you are successful in obtaining the DSP, as more than a third of people receiving it are still living in poverty in Australia. In addition to this, if you do not qualify as having a disability in the eyes of the government, then you are highly likely to be considered as the undeserving poor and therefore refuse to work out of your own personal choice. Consequently, individuals with poor mental health concerns must find suitable employment to avoid poverty or rely on an alternative welfare benefit to survive, such as the New Start allowance, and fall even further below the poverty line. The structural theory of poverty recognises that the life chances and socio-economic status of a person is determined by outside structural forces that the individual has no control over, such as Australia operating as a capitalist society. The structural theory of poverty places great emphasis on the social circumstances that contribute to poverty, such as economic growth, labour market opportunities, educational provision, social security systems, and many other structural features. Capitalism forces individuals to compete against each other to become economically successful regardless of the disadvantage some groups face, as well as not having access to the same resources, services and opportunities as the next person. Consequently, the capitalist system contributes to those who are already disadvantaged, particularly mental health consumers who are not able to compete in the job market. Therefore, in order to improve conditions for people experiencing poverty due to poor mental health concerns, the social structures need to change to effectively support these individuals. Lastly, the social exclusion, or the multi-dimensional theory of poverty, considers both individual freedoms and structural aspects to understand the individual's level of poverty. According to the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, social exclusion is a more effective measurement because it takes into account many factors, not simply income. Additionally, the social exclusion theory of poverty acknowledges that there is a structural problem that contributes to poverty in Australia, but it also focuses on the individual circumstances to help alleviate their risk of poverty. For example, there is a mix of structural and individual theories in the Work for the Dole program, as the individual must be motivated to attend regular meetings to secure employment. However, the government understands that there is a structural problem for job seekers, which is why they develop job service agencies to try and tackle this social problem. And now I'm going to hand you over to Kirsten.
Hi, I'll be talking about the experiences and impacts on poverty on mental health consumers and their relative lived experiences. In 2014, the World Health Organization published a report on the social determinants of mental health. One of the key messages from this report is that a two-way relationship exists between mental health and poverty. According to the WHO, mental illness leads to a reduced income and employment, which then establishes poverty and in turn increases the risk of mental illness. In addition to the challenges posed by mental illness itself, consumers encounter structural barriers including poverty, social stigma, inability to afford medication, and limited social opportunities. For many users, having both financial problems and mental illness means having to live on the margin of society. Here are 2 examples. Anne, today I can pay my bills and eat. I hope. And yet, the last week in the month can be so tough that I'm reduced to eating like cheap sausage, and even that's too expensive. Sometimes I've had to borrow money from my parents just to make ends meet if it's been a really bad month. Another solution to living on the margin is to refrain from buying anything at all. Sarah is an example of this. I went to the shopping centre today with the psychiatric team, but I didn't buy anything because I didn't have any money. Sometimes we have coffee there, but I didn't have money for that either. They have pea soup on special offer, but I couldn't afford it. I love pea soup. The inability to afford meds is another issue that the consumers face. To go with that had to do with the expenses connected to the person's mental health problems, such as not buying medicine or not going to the dentist, or not visiting appointments because of the cost of transportation. Putting food on the table or treating the very illness that put them in their position is a sad reality for many who suffers of mental illness. Kylie's story is an example of this. Kylie is a 28-year-old single mother of 2. She suffers from schizophrenia and she cannot work because of her condition. Kylie states, I don't think society understands the insidious cycle created by having mental illness and living on the lowest of incomes. Every day is spent working out what bill must be paid and which can wait. It is mentally draining and all-consuming, exacerbating my symptoms. For me, low income means being acutely aware of what is in another person's shopping trolley. I'm in awe when I see trolleys stacked with meat and brand name products, luxury items to us. Kylie goes on to state that the average cost of medication for people with mental illness is $100 per month, which for those living on a disability pension is a huge chunk of their budget. Kylie's story is not unique. There are many others in a similar position who just cannot afford the bare essentials to make their conditions bearable or to even engage in everyday activities. The difficulty of finding places to go and things to do further illustrates the way in which poverty reproduces the socially and spatially marginal status of people with serious mental illness. Phil relates that even the most modest activities like going for a coffee were sometimes difficult. Sometimes I go for a walk downtown just to get some fresh air, and I might have the money, but I don't allow myself to even buy a coffee because it adds up over 30 days if you have 1 coffee a day. And Jeff as well. It's not important, but it would be nice to go see a movie once in a while, just to get out and away from the house. You feel very caged in. It gets very closed in. Not being able to participate in these everyday activities also impacts mental health consumers' ability to engage in social relationships. Since chronic mental illness can impair interpersonal functioning and consumers' networks tend to be smaller with greater reliance on family members, it is important to consider the effects on poverty on the social relationships. For many users, taking holiday trips or other excursions was never an option. Some also refrained from social contact with family and friends. Gloria's example. I tried to visit my mother once, and she can't always pick me up because the car is giving her problems, and she's getting older and she won't be able to drive. I take the bus. It's about $3.05. One way or another, I try to get there. I put money aside. And then for Phil, he goes on to state, I've got daughters, and it takes away your responsibility and it takes away your accessibility to see them. You try to make excuses because you don't have the money. You really don't. If you go out and spend $15, $20, you're in big trouble. Stigma. A third implication concerns the extent to which financial problems affect mental health consumers' experiences of social stigma. two specific issues are identified. The first concerns the relationship between poverty and internalized stigma among respondents. Research on relative deprivation suggests that people's standard of living relative to others has a pronounced impact on health and well-being, and how consumers feel about their financial situation relative to others in the community may shape their perceptions of themselves and their lives. Respondents offered many examples of situations in which relative deprivation contributed to a stigmatized self-image. One example of this is from Keith. Usually if I see something I'd like, I say, no, I can't have that, that's too expensive. You have to have a sense of value about things. On the other hand, it makes me feel pretty good because I have money in my pocket. But in another sense, I feel like a second-class citizen because I'm not having what other people are having. Additionally, people were asked to describe how they felt about their current financial situation. Their responses included the following. It kind of makes me feel like a bum on the street, a very low-class part of society. Sometimes I feel like people are saying, that guy's a bum, because of the way I dress. While quantitative data can make it easier to see numbers of poverty and mental illness, qualitative data provides us with a more comprehensive picture of the experiences that mental health consumers face. The often inescapable cycle of mental illness and poverty can mean that mental health consumers have no hope, which is detrimental to their mental health. Understanding the lived experiences of consumers gives us a whole picture of the impact it has on the individual, whilst also putting a face to those affected by poverty and mental health. I'll be now going on to Joe, who will further discuss this.
Alright, so I'm Joe and I'm talking about the Disability Support Pension. Now, the Disability Support Pension, or DSP, is the main or only social security benefit offered to people with a disability or mental illness. According to a 2013 study by McVicker and Wilkins, the Disability Support Pension alone totaled $14.9 billion in the year of 2012 to 2013. Now, they also state in their study that there is a widely held concern that the disability support pension leads to welfare dependency, which kind of reflects society's views on people who seek to claim the pension and people who are actually on the pension as well. Now, people who are on the disability support pension receive payments based on their circumstances, such as their living arrangements, their relationship status, and their age. Now, here is a chart which specifies the maximum amount of payment that a person who is on the disability support pension will receive fortnightly. And this is from the Human Services website. So, if you are over 21 with or without children and are single, your total fortnightly payment will be $907.60. Now, it's very clear that when you go to people who are under the age of 21, there is a big discrepancy between their payments. As you can see, so if you're single, under the age of 18, and live at home, your payment is $371.20. And if you're single and under the age of 18 but are independent, your payment goes to $572.90 a fortnight. So there is a massive gap between those two. Obviously, they do take into consideration your living arrangements as one of the greater aspects of how much you will receive a fortnight. But I think it's interesting to note that now, according to the Centrelink website, to be eligible to receive the disability support pension, one must be between the age of 16 years and the age pension age, which is 65. You must have a permanent medical condition that stops you from working. you must meet residency requirements, and you must also meet the income and assets test, which is used to it's used to calculate, the amount of income support you are able to receive. Now, claiming the DSP sounds easy on when you're looking at the information posted on the Centrelink website, because all they say, the information that they provide, firstly, is to people who are looking to claim the disability support pension. So that information that they give you is simply contact Centrelink to discuss claiming, complete your forms, get medical evidence, submit your claim, and then Centrelink will contact you to let you know whether or not you've been successful. However, in a 2016 article by Ashley McAllister, she identifies two aspects of the claiming process which is not mentioned on the Centrelink website. And those are the impairment table and the job capacity assessment. Now, according to the DSS, the impairment table is used to assess the medical impairment of a person seeking to claim the DSP. The impairment table charts a person's disabilities and provides them with a score. If a person reaches a score of 20 or over, they have qualified for the disability support pension. If they have a score under 20, then you are deemed to still be able to work. The job capacity assessment is designed to assess the individual's capability to maintain work and assess the amount of hours that that person can work. Now, to qualify for the DSP, a person must prove that they are unable to work for more than 15 hours a week and that their disability will last for 2 years at least. Now, Ashley McAllister stated that the impairment table and job capacity assessment are limited in their capacity to identify mental illness, and that the impairment table specifically has been criticised for not being evidence-based. Now, both of these assessments used to identify if a person is unable to work, both fail to take stress of and the demands of the job into consideration. Now, this is a direct quote from Ashley McAllister from her article. So the DSP disability determination process uses capacity-focused language, but the process for determining a person's capacity is opaque, which to me says that they give you all of this information and they try to make it sound as easy as possible and as attainable as possible, yet they're not being transparent, and they're not providing you with all of the information that you need to succeed in getting the DSP. Now, with the information that we've gotten on how much people get and the ridiculousness with the job capacity assessment and the impairment table, it seems to me that the disability support pension is not designed for people with mental illnesses, and it is very difficult for somebody with a mental illness to prove that they're not going to be able to work for at least 2 years or more, and that this illness is going to affect their life on a larger scale. But it also shows that it is incapable of alleviating poverty within our chosen group. Now, lastly, I would like to leave you with a video which is not necessarily specifically about people with mental illness on the disability support pension, but more how unfair the disability support pension can be to anyone with a disability. So thank you for watching.
We're about to introduce you to a Perth woman, Prue Hawkins, a 33-year-old, has a condition known as osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle bone disease, which means she needs to use a wheelchair. However, Prue says she's been denied the federal government's disability support pension because she's not disabled enough, unless
what they said to you about your refusal for the disability support pension?
Sure. Essentially, what they did was they assessed me under this job capacity assessment table that is part of the legislation that Centrelink have to abide by, and basically I didn't collect enough magical points on this magical table that said that I was eligible again for the DSP.
Because you were working.
Yeah, essentially what happened was I was on the disability support pension from the age of 16 through to about 28, where I gained full-time employment as a solicitor. And once you become fully employed, you're then no longer eligible for the disability support pension, which is another conversation for another time. And so what that meant was that when I lost my job and obviously need to be looking for another one, I reapplied for the DSP and was told that because I had worked in the past and because I'd proven that I had the ability to work, I was no longer eligible for the DSP.
So, Prue, what does this say to you about other people who have a disability and are thinking about getting into the workforce or want to work?
Don't. Essentially, it's shocking because on one side they're always bumbling guns about, we want to get people with disabilities into the workforce and all that sort of stuff, but this sends a message to myself and to other people, in my position with, don't go out and get a job, don't go out and educate yourself, sit at home, bump off the government, sit in a dark corner and feel sorry for yourself, because if you go out and try and strive and try and actually become a member of society, a paying member of society, we're going to punish you by taking the DSP off you and you'll never get it back.
Why have you chosen to speak out about this?
Well, look, I think, there's been many, many things over the years that I could have gone to the media about in my journey, but I think the biggest button for me was, I will be okay, I will survive. My family are amazing and have the ability to look after me. But I'm telling you now, I know from my experience as a disability discrimination lawyer that I'm one of the very lucky ones. And my biggest issue was, what about the people out there that don't have the support system that I have, that don't also have the voice that I have, that this is happening to as well? That's what scared me, which is why I've sort of been having chats with people about it.
Well, look, it sounds like you have a real fight on your hands, and good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Tim.